So that's kind of my thoughts right now.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll jump over now to a bit more of what we think could be some of the greatest challenges. Heiko, what about from like where you live and the community there? What would be challenges surrounding space mining?
I think around space mining, it's also a bit, yeah, to make it sustainable is one of the greatest challenge actually. Also to define a bit what sustainability, and not only to make it look like it and not hide the parts that we say we, for the time being, we still shoot material from Earth to space to establish that. So we have to be able to fast to reuse that resources in space, and also reuse them properly, not to make the same mistakes. It's about awareness raising. A lot of people don't know about the benefits of space in general, and even less about space mining. There are a lot of different ideas about it. I also feel like with us that a lot of some of those space tourism activities that are going on, they are not very helpful in this respect for the perception of the public. I think this is something what is really important to make the public known, and also to let them know that whatever they do on Earth, if there is a lunar economy, there will be everything. Literally every other job would also, or industry would be applicable for there, and that they can participate, right? And then also to have Dan also said something like this, for to commercialize it. I think it's nothing. Usually, if there's no return, if there's no commercial benefit, there has to be, of course, the sustainability part. But as long as if there's not also commercial benefit, or at least something, yeah, I think we will have trouble um, pulling it off, because then people will not really participate. At least not in the beginning, because this is something you cannot change overnight.
Yeah, thank you. So did Jason or Dan, did you have anything to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think, look, the challenges are many. You could you could say they're near infinite. I mean, there's a lot of technical challenges. If you look at the timeline to getting a mine built on Earth, it's in the kind of like 8 to 12 year range, right? And that's kind of a full development cycle. And so to really get a mine off the ground, and so we've got to deliver in line with Artemis goals around 50 tons of propellant on the lunar surface, produced on the lunar surface in around 2030. So you're talking at this point like 7.5 years to build the mine and the tech stack to support that, to convince the capital that that's the right thing to do, to build the credibility around space resources, where a lot of people think this is science fiction and not something that's kind of needed in the immediate future. So I would say the challenges are near infinite, but that's what makes it exciting, and that's what makes it something fun to work on. I wouldn't be here if this wasn't a challenging thing to do. But we think it's achievable within that time to pull this off. We think that a lot of the technology is far enough along, and there are kind of creative solutions to some of the problem. It's really a question of vision, coordination, and willpower, and capital that's kind of needed to get where we need to get to pull off Artemis and everything else here. And then maybe to that to Heike's point earlier, it is about that commercialization. So all the stuff we work on, from a technology side, we look at, okay, well, what are the terrestrial benefits to this technology? What is the commercial value on Earth? Because let's say a sensor technology, the value in space may be $100 million in the next 10 years, but the value on Earth may be in the billions of dollars in that same period. So I think you have to look at like where the existing commercial markets are, and how you can as a company develop technologies which allow you to stay solvent to make it to the moon and to address some of these kind of big problems. Because if you look at the first generation of space mining companies, I mean, Planetary Resources being the best example. I think Luxembourg government spent through $30 million of them, and they never made it to space, right? And so, one, I say you've got to be, solvent to get to the moon in the first place. And then you've really got to think about, short paths to commercialization, how you can build a real business around this while tackling these big technical challenges, which have lots of benefit to everyone.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like, there are a lot of challenges, of course, but like you said, you think it's feasible and there's a reason people are interested in. So for those people who are interested in space mining, how do you get involved in that? It's not, I think, as obvious as people who want to do aerospace engineering or astrophysics. How do we get our youth and people at university to become involved more in space mining? Jason, do you have any thoughts about that?
I personally think there is lots of work to do, as we said. And from my perspective, at least from the north, I do not really know that there's anything up here, anyways, to get involved. I do believe Luxembourg has quite a few interesting programs, if I'm not mistaken. And Canada is very slow behind. Unfortunately, there will be lots of resistance because there's the mining industry in Canada is very resistant to changes in technology. They're finally starting to catch up ever since been having a real struggle with workforces. So there is going to be lots of changes, and I believe that the technology that will develop for mining in space can also benefit in really extreme environments of Earth. But to get involved, it will really take some programs from enterprises such as Dan's and other big corps that are involved to do STEM outreach and showing the kids different pathways and different things in a funding, meaningful way so that they can learn a little bit about it and be the change makers that they want to see. And I mean, it's a carte blanche. The whole industry is still being forged as we speak. And I think Dan's been working really great at pioneering this in Canada, and the government's got to listen more to it. And we should be leaders in it because we are practicing and working on sustainability now in mining in Canada so that we are better every day, so that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, which are happening in a lot of mines around the world, unfortunately. And we don't want that to happen in space. We want it to be ethically great. We want it to be diverse and very sustainable. But how do we do that? We have to work with all the partners through consortiums and work together to make it happen. And we got to start now. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. And I would say I would maybe disagree with one of Jason's points. I think there's actually some amazing opportunities in Northern Ontario that we're a Toronto company, Toronto and Montreal, and some of the stuff around kind of NORCAD and happening in Sudbury. I think if you're a young entrepreneur or someone coming out of university, I think there is a lot of opportunity for support if you want to start a mining technologies company and you can find a way to create a kind of parallel path technology between space and Earth. I think there is a lot of stuff that is available in the North that wouldn't necessarily be available kind of elsewhere. And then just lastly, that I think to Madison, to one of your points, like this actually. A lot of people said, okay, well, I didn't end up in the space industry because I didn't study aerospace engineering. And as we know, look, there's a lot of people in the space industry, people who are, business idiots, who are not engineers, right? And I think space mining and space resources, and let's take the broader sense, which is ISRU, in situ resource utilization, really is going to pull from a lot of different areas, anywhere from kind of agriculture, mining, different parts of chemistry and physics, and different areas that were not necessarily caught within kind of the traditional space robotics sector or space communications. And so I think it just opens up more opportunities for people to get involved within the space sector in general. It's a broadener in some senses.
Just want to add to that. Yes, in the bigger centers like Sudbury and those bigger areas that are like 5 hours away from us in Cochrane and almost 9 hours away from communities like Wallow and Duberville. And a lot of people are going to say, well, who cares about these places because they're small? But every place matters. It's not about the quantity; it's the who you can inspire. And there's not much outreach in these places, and that's where we need to start having more outreach in small communities that are mining communities. Like I get that Sudbury is a large mining community, and there's a large presence by NORCAD and everything. Heck, we have one of the biggest gold mines in Canada in Cochrane, and there's no real outreach when it comes to mining for making it fun for the kids and incorporating some parts of space to it. But again, it's always been the bigger cities to some degree, and I don't want to discredit what you're saying. Northern Ontario is very large. Just the Cochrane district is about 3 times the size of the United Kingdom. So,
Right.
lots of forests, obviously, but we need to create opportunity for our Indigenous youth in the northern communities as well, and northern and rural, to get involved and to better understand. So, because they're the voices of the future, and if we're going to have an economy up there in the next 20 years, they're going to be some of the change makers in the mining, because a lot of change makers in mining come from those mining communities. For an instance, George Peary was just here yesterday, the newly appointed Ministry of mining for Ontario, and he was blown away by what we were doing for the festival. And he's a very prominent figure in the mining industry, and he comes from Timmins, and he changed a lot of these things. And Ingrid Eberg's husband was here as well, and she's one of the reasons Detour Gold is where it's at today. And they unfortunately didn't all have these opportunities to do that stuff, but you can see that even in small communities, there's giant change makers that are part of these boards today. And if they could be inspired to doing something towards space as well, it can make a big difference. But it needs to be almost like a road show. And I know that's resource intensive, but if we're going to create a grassroots movement, it has to be across the board. That's just my thoughts personally.
Yeah, and I was saying there are some economic incentives which apply in general to Northern Ontario, which don't necessarily apply. You don't have to be in Sudbury. You could be in Cochrane, and you're still eligible for these kind of economic programs around innovation in mining and some of these areas. And so it's probably also about educating the youth that these opportunities exist and getting the knowledge out there, because there's smart people with bright ideas, right? And they probably don't know where to start, right? So it's definitely that grassroots activity. And but I'd still say that there's a lot of opportunities out there. It's just knowing where to find them is a skill in and of itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that festivals like this that really promote this to the wide range of people who may not know about something so niche like space mining, that people in the space industry are very aware of. So Heike, I wonder, what about in Luxembourg or Europe at large? How can people get involved in this industry?
Yeah, I'm just still taking in the difficulties you're having in this region. So Luxembourg is obviously it's in the middle of Europe, so it's lot more population there, even though there are two big cities and also a lot of rural area in that respect. But I think that we have the slight advantage of that Luxembourg is really international, that they have been doing this very early on and very inspiring. Still, there are a lot lack of people who enter in the STEM fields, in space in general. And so Luxembourg is doing a lot to attract also internationally. We have really a huge international community of lots of people of different fields. Again, there's the research center that needs to be made known. There are events For kids, also with astronauts, for example, there's the Asteroid Day, which is in Luxembourg, also awareness raising for our planetary future. They invite astronauts to come there. They go into schools. There are days at schools where companies, every kind of company, if the youth is to choose what to do next after school, so we're going into the schools and telling them what we're doing. Then there are also, I don't know, events for scouts. There are all sorts of challenges. So this is for the younger people, but there are also, again, Luxembourg is part of the European thing, and the European Space Agency, for example, and there are programs, for example, which foster the collaboration from space, and programs which are dedicated to include a non-space company into a space project, exactly to do this, to understand what do we already have, not to reinvent the wheel, but to then mutually understand the frame condition and the requirements, and then work on something that's beneficial for space and also for Earth. And yeah, I think that there's going on a lot, but it's tough because there's still not enough people who are really getting into this.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. So we have about 10 minutes remaining. So I just want to finish up by asking each of you how you think that space mining is going to be evolving, both in the short term, in the next, 10, 20 years, and then the long term, like 50 plus. So yeah, Dan, what are your thoughts on your short term, long term thoughts of how space mining will evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in the next 10 years, it's to me, it's about like a prioritization of resources and where we are from a technology standpoint. So I think like in the next 10 years, we're getting to the moon, we're producing propellant on the moon and other kind of basic consumables. In the 20-year period, other things to mine that would be important for sustaining life in space become kind of important. So, the base metals, potentially other raw feedstock inputs for manufacturing in space, manufacturing of satellites, of hardware, et cetera, are going to come from the lunar environment. Stuff around kind of rare earths, stuff that's needed to power the future of our sustainable economy on Earth, battery metals, stuff like that. You'll start to see them come from space. And then around kind of 20 years from now, we get into asteroid mining. I still think we're quite a ways out from that being feasible at scale. If you look at the data from OSIRIS-REx, the asteroid is like constantly reforming upon itself. So I think, the idea that there's going to be asteroid mining in 5 years, say good luck. But I'm not smart enough to pull that off. But, and then over the next 50 to 100 years, look, my thought is that it's primarily, helping us sustain an industry which is decoupled from Earth's gravity. So an ability to produce everything that we need in space and to harvest resources where we go for consumption in those areas. So as we go to Mars, we should not be bringing resources with us. We should be bringing the capabilities to produce those resources that are already on the planet. It's extremely wasteful and inefficient. And then lastly, I see a more sustainable version of space, right? Right now, space is extremely unsustainable and inefficient with the way we bring resources up there, with our lack of refueling of satellites. It's just kind of ridiculous. It's not that the technology for satellite servicing hasn't existed. It's actually been a question of willpower and of approach of companies of not wanting to share docking capabilities and stuff like that. So, in order to, over the next 100 years, I see life sustainably kind of living decoupled from Earth's gravity and us really having this thriving kind of space for space economy fueled by the activities of space resources. And then the space mining sector having disrupted positively the mining sector on Earth, which is, extremely resistant to change and technology adaptation, and is obviously far from sustainable in its approaches, and has a lot to learn. And I think like that's where we see it being kind of ripe for disruption as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So Heike, what about you? Short-term, long-term thoughts on how space mining will be evolving?
Yeah, I think that's a very tough question. I mean, predictions. Niels Bohr said it. Best predictions are very difficult, especially for the future. But I probably will not be around, especially that you tell me that my long-term idea was wrong. I just yeah, I just think the development, I mean, the short term, what Dan just described is pretty much how I see it as well. So you have currently a lot of research, a proof of concept, then you go to upscaling, and then you go also farther away. You start with the moon, you go to the asteroids, you go to Mars or whatever. And for the long term, I can just only hope that all this doesn't end up like in a new gold rush, who is that everybody is first, and then we don't do the same mistakes we're doing on Earth. We're fighting about these things, and then I really hope that there will be a more this unifying approach in the long term, and that we have found a solution to really save our resources and energy problems in the future.
Great, thanks. And Jason, let's finish with you. What are your views on how this will all evolve, short-term and long-term?
You want the short-term mosquito or the short-term normal? I'm teasing.
Maybe normal.
I think in the short term, there's going to be some grassroots movements being founded in the industries, and lots of collaboration internationally that has to be done. As you all said, research is paramount for this, in establishing sets of rules in space policy to make it sustainable will take a lot of time, because at the beginning it will not be a guaranteed sustainability. Like you said, obviously, it's kind of like building the first electric cars. There's a lot of work to get to where we need to go to make it sustainable, but it needs to happen. By doing it, it will make it so much better for us here and us in space, because we only have so much little time on this planet. If you look from the stars, at one point we're just a little blue dot, right? Like everyone says, and we got to protect our Earth. And I don't want to be sounding like saying, "Hey, we got to protect our Earth and we got to do space mining." But it is reality. We can't live without nowadays in modern age without electronics. We wouldn't be talking right now without the mining industry. We wouldn't be communicating. We'd be having quite a hard time with just wood to be calling right now. And so it is inevitable. It will happen. There's going to be lots of lobbying needed. Um, and that's what's going to be happening in the short term, forging these key people. And there's going to be lots of successes, lots of failures, lots of stubbornness, because that's what we need. It might take a long time, just like it took for SpaceX and Blue Origin to come to fruition. 20 years maybe for some of that stuff to start being concrete, but you just have to have the right people around the table to make it happen, and never give up and push forward. And I think this is the short term. The long term, well, it's very unknown. Sci-fi realm. Hopefully not like in Delta V, the book, or The Expanse. But hopefully it's going to be a good thing. But we got to realize that no matter where we're going in space, we are humans, and we cannot dehumanize ourselves. We got to accept our flaws, and when we go up in space, we're going to be bringing humanity where, and no matter what. And it will be quite some time, but it will be quite something to have that going, and it's the only logical next steps. Those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. I'm really glad to hear the three of your thoughts to wrap up this session today. And I know the people locally here in Cochrane and all of this wider reach people tuning in from the rest of Canada and globally, hopefully will now be inspired to try and figure out what they can do to get involved in space mining and to get in early to figure out like how to make it sustainable and last for this long duration that we really need it. I just want to thank the three of you for being here, for joining us today for this really exciting and interesting talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Absolutely, big witch.
me. Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So we will be back in about 30 minutes with a video from Shauna Pandya. Thank you all. Welcome back, everybody, to the Stardust Festival. So, for those of you who are eager to see Dr. Shauna Pandya's talk yesterday, we unfortunately had some technical difficulties, but luckily enough, she did record a video for us that we will be playing her talk here. For those who are not aware, Dr. Shauna Pandya is a physician, aquanaut, scientist, astronaut candidate program graduate with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, skydiver, pilot in training, VP Immersive Medicine with Luxonic Technologies, Director of Medical Research at Orbital Assembly Corporation, and Fellow of the Explorers Club. Beyond all of these great accolades, in 2022, she was actually named to the Explorers Club's 50 Explorers Changing the World. I'm really eager to share her talk with everyone today.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Shauna Pandya, and I am so excited to be spending this session telling you about my journey with pushing the limits. So for those of you who don't know me, I am very lucky to be a Canadian physician, scientist, astronaut candidate with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, so much more. And I get to wear a lot of hats in the technology world, which we'll talk about as well. But before I was any of this, I was a kid with a dream. And I would go camping with my family and stare at the night sky and be mesmerized by these glittering arm of the Milky Way galaxy, looking at these beautiful diasporas of night skies and thinking, I want to be up there. And then I realized that there were people who actually lived and worked in space. And I was lucky enough to be growing up in the 90s when Canada's first ever female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, flew into space. And for me, this was so exciting. Oh, she's Canadian. I'm Canadian. She's female. I'm female. So now to go to space, all I need to do is go be a neuroscientist physician and then an astronaut, just like her. And the craziest thing about having dreams as a kid is that if you work really, really hard and have a point of focus, where you end up as an adult is going to surpass where you will think you'll end up beyond your wildest expectations. So today I get to wear a lot of hats, as you've heard. I'm a physician. I'm trained in family practice. I do a lot of rural emergency medicine, women's health as well. And then I get to do some really cool things in astronautics through my work with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. So we call this IIAS for short. We get to test spacesuits in zero gravity on parabolic flight. You may have heard of this as the vomit comet. So how do we generate zero G without ever going up to space? We do this by flying in parabolas up and down. And so when we do that, we are falling at the same rate as the airplane, just like when you're in a roller coaster. When you go over the top crest of that roller coaster, you're weightless for a second and your stomach lifts up to your throat because you're falling at the same rate as the airplane. And so it's just like when you're going down in an elevator and you, again, get that sensation. So when we do that in parabolic flight, we generate periods of zero gravity for about 20 seconds at a time. And I could keep telling you what it's like, but I'd rather show you.
Power all the tasks so that I can record it now. No rain in the background. No rain in the background. So, I will just look at the report back.
So I have to say, if you ever have the opportunity to fly zero G in a spacesuit, I highly recommend it. It's impossible to be weightless with a spacesuit and not have a giant smile on your face. Um, and I get to do all sorts of other cool things with AAS as well. So we've learned to test other types of spacesuits. The last one you saw was called an IVA, or intravehicular activity spacesuit. This one is called an EVA, or extravehicular activity spacesuit. This is the kind you might see astronauts wear on spacewalks. It has added layers of protection. And we can test altered or microgravity in different ways using a gravity offset harness. So we use this harness to offload a certain percentage of our weight. And in this particular scenario, we were lucky enough to partner with the Canadian Space Agency and the University of Maryland, as well as Final Frontier Design, who made the spacesuit. So we get to contribute to the future of astronautics and human spaceflight in a very cool way. We also get to test spacesuits in water scenarios. So, and we also get to do some really cool science. So in this particular scenario, we were working as a crew of 3, going up in an unpressurized research aircraft at 19,000 feet. And we were testing this brand new science experiment, science instrument that you see over my right shoulder, that would allow us to get more data on this cloud thought to be related to climate change, called a noctilucent cloud. And this particular research campaign was done in northern Alberta, by the way. So you don't have to go all the way to space, or you don't have to go to the ends of the earth. You can do some really cool research right here in Canada. So I mentioned we do some very cool water research as well. So we also want to know how this spacesuit interfaces with the water, if you ever need to make an emergency egress outside of your space capsule. So in here, we've made an emergency decision to get out of our space capsule and then egress into the water, and then seal our suit, pull our portable flotation devices, and then crawl into the emergency raft. And we learn a lot by working and living underwater as well. So we've also designed and built a neutral buoyancy lab, and we get to test procedures that we might need to test in a spacewalk. And the value of being underwater is we use the qualities of the water to generate neutral buoyancy. So it's almost as if like we're weightless for an extended period of time, and then we can work as if we were working in space. Speaking of water, my experiences have also taken me to living and working underwater. So I've been lucky enough to gain my aquanaut designation, which is where you live underwater and breathe the ambient air pressure. So you breathe the pressure at a higher, the air at a higher pressure that's at a deeper level of the water than you would at the surface. And so once you've done that for 24 hours, you're an aquanaut. And I did that for 5 days in the Florida Keys at the Jules Undersea Lodge in 2019 on something called the Neptune mission. So just like we talked about other acronyms with EVA and IVA, here's another acronym. This is Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. And this was my crew, 3 Americans, 2 Canadians, and we performed science experiments, technology demonstrations, and outreach events while we were underwater. And just down the road from the Jules Undersea Lodge, NASA also does this with their astronauts, turning them into aquanauts at the Aquarius Reef Base through their NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations missions, where they send their astronauts to do the same thing for 8 to 16 days at a time. I was lucky enough to go there for a dive medical technician course to gain knowledge about dive injuries and how we treat them from a medical standpoint. Speaking of austere environments, I've also been lucky enough to be a crew medical officer as well as a commander on Mars simulation missions. So this looks like something out of Star Wars. It looks like a Tatooine, but this is actually in the Utah desert in the United States. We call this the MDRS, or the Mars Desert Research Station. And the whole value of a place like this is you're very isolated, and you bring your science with you, and you learn to live and work as a crew for 2 weeks at a time. And if you go outside, it's as if you're working and living on Mars. So you have to suit up, and you get to go on these beautiful exploratory excursions. And here's what that looks like. And it's just an incredible experience. I highly recommend it. And finally, I've been lucky enough to bring my own expertise in medicine and austere environments to help contribute to education and research in the space and extreme environment sphere. So I'm an instructor. I'm the chief instructor for operational space medicine at IIAS, as well as the director of the space medicine group. And I get to teach people who are interested in what it means to learn about space medicine as well as wilderness medicine, and teach them skills that may help them survive in austere environments. I also work with a Canadian company called Lexonic Technologies to build educational modules for medical skills in virtual reality. We've built these scenarios for the Canadian Space Agency to help astronauts practice their medical skills on a long duration flight so they don't lose those skills. And I also work with a company called Orbital Assembly Corporation to help direct their medical research. And this company is really cool because they're building the first partial gravity commercial space station. So just like you see in Space Odyssey 2001, it's a space station, but it has some gravity. And finally, I've been lucky enough to pick up some skills along the way in diving, rescue diving, nitrox diving, and piloting. I'm finishing up my pilot's license. Skydiving, I'm a solo skydiver with my accelerated free fall license, and also a martial artist. And finally, I get to share my story and journey with amazing audiences like yourselves. And the funniest part of this is it started with a dream. It started by being inspired by an incredible Canadian. And it was the honor of a lifetime to have my journey and experiences captured next to hers at the Ontario Science Centre, Canada's largest science centre. And I've also had my work honored by the Explorers Club, being honored as one of the 50 explorers changing the world in 2022. And so I'm not here to tell you about all of the cool things that I've done. I'm really proud of that work, and I hope it excites you as well. But I'm here today to also share 5 key lessons that I think will help you along your journey. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is success and failure, because it's so easy to see someone you admire and you look up to and think, oh my gosh, I want to be like them. They've made it. They had a goal. They set it and they just achieved it. And it's easy to think you go from point A to point B when we're talking about success, when in reality, success looks a lot more like this. If you ask anyone who you admire, who seems to have success, most of the time they'll have taken 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 5 steps forward, 7 steps back. So I want to let you know that whatever you set out to do, it's okay to fail. And that's important enough that I'm going to say that again to you. It is okay to fail. And so it's really easy to think, looking from the outside, that, you know, someone's successful, but failure can often look very deceptively innocuous and attractive looking. And so here's an example from one of my parabolic flight campaigns, my zero-G flight campaign. So this is about 5 years ago. We were testing a brand new spacesuit with a brand new aircraft out of a brand new airfield. So there were all these unknowns, and we wanted to set ourselves up for success. And so the most veteran flyers, including myself, were asked to fly this campaign. Except that day, going into the flight, and I'd flown zero-G many times before. This would have been, I think, my 4th campaign. Something fell off. I felt queasy, and I thought, you know, forget it, just walk it off. You have one job, you have a spacesuit to test. So I decided to fly the campaign, and we got 5 parabolas into a 30 parabola flight. And the flight director took one look at my face. He saw it was ashen gray. He said, called to knock it off. He aborted the test. He pulled me out of the spacesuit, and 30 seconds later, I threw up. And I felt horrible because we had lost the vast majority of the data that we were supposed to get in that flight. And what I learned from that scenario was you can always use unsuccessful scenarios to make yourself better, because there's a way to be hard on yourself in a way that's destructive or a way that's productive. And failure can be a beautiful teacher if you let it. but you have to have the tools to be able to learn from your failures. And so one of the tools that we use in astronautics and medicine and operational environments is the art of the debrief. And what I mean by that is we surround, every time that we fly a campaign, we all surround ourselves around the table. We talk through the mission. We talk what we're going to go through in every single parabola. Then we break off in our groups. We practice them until we all know every single maneuver that we're doing parabola by parabola. Then we go on the grounded aircraft. We run through the scenario as a dress rehearsal. Finally, we fly the campaign, and then we come back around the table and debrief again, action by action, parabola by parabola, to share the things that went well and how we achieved those patterns of success, share the lessons learned of things that might have been hard, and also the things that didn't go so well and how we might improve on them so that we know what to do better the next time, and how we can also share these lessons with our teammates so they may perform better in the next scenario. So that's what I mean when I say that failure can be a beautiful teacher if you let it. Because in this particular scenario, I took everything that was suboptimal about my flight that day, from feeling too warm to feeling dehydrated to feeling fatigued to feeling queasy, and I addressed every single one of those factors. And 6 weeks later, I was able to fly a successful campaign out of the National Research Council in Ottawa, Canada. So the other thing is that failure isn't so always easy to deal with. It can feel awful. It can feel like you've hit rock bottom and there's no way up. And so to help deal with those feelings, I'm a big believer in practicing to cultivate resilience. So resilience, what is that? That's that mental toughness, that grit, that fortitude, that ability to bounce back when things aren't so good. And the research shows us that resilience is something that we can actually practice and become better at. It's not something that we're born with. And there's so many models out there, but one that I like views resilience as a 5-part skill set that involves learning to break things down, positive self-talk, telling yourself that you have this tough scenario, mental rehearsal, preparing yourself for the worst and the best case scenarios, impulse control, resisting the impulse to give up, and then also calling on your team and relying on positive social supports. So I just told you that failure can look deceptively innocuous looking and look really attractive. And the other thing aside of that is success isn't always pretty and success isn't always perfect. So let me tell you about a different training scenario. In 2018, we undertook our first water egress training scenario. And in this particular case, we were simulating landing into the ocean in our spacesuits on a parachute off an aborted launch attempt. And what we had to do is we had to land into the water, unhook ourselves from the harness, deploy our portable flotation devices, pull the seals on our spacesuit, swim over to the raft, climb up the ladder, and declare ourselves home free. Except for me, when I hit the water, my scenario started to go sideways immediately and my spacesuit filled with water. And so by the time that I got to the raft, not only was I pulling the weight of my body, the weight of my spacesuit up the ladder, but the weight of a spacesuit full of water up to my neck, which became immensely heavy. So not only was I trying to get up this ladder, I was trying to pull far more than my body weight, which made this, what was supposed to be a 2-minute training scenario, turn into this monumentally difficult 10-minute plus scenario. And I was struggling to get up every single millimeter of the ladder to try to achieve success. And my success at the end of the day, I got up there, looked like this. And so just to orientate you as to what's going on, I'm not sitting in the life raft in a proper organized position. You see me tangled up in the rope right there, my foot sticking in the air, face first into the raft. So this is what I mean when I say success isn't always pretty and success isn't always perfect. And you may get to where you want to go. But there's always something to learn along the way. And so coming back to these principles of resilience that I was just telling you about, every single one of those principles of resilience came into play that day. There was that breaking things down. For me, it wasn't as simple as start to finish, land in the water, get in the raft. It was when I got to the ladder, not even focusing on going from the bottom to the top of the ladder, but focusing on every single millimeter of ground gained, because it was so hard and so heavy to go up that ladder. And my fingers were shaking, begging to give up. And that's where that impulse control came in. There was that resisting that impulse to give up and to start over. There was the positive self-talk, telling myself that I had this, the mental rehearsal of putting myself into a real life ocean scenario, because in that case, the stakes became much higher, knowing that I could, if I chose to give up, if I was a real life ocean scenario, that was akin to accepting death. And finally, having those positive social supports made all the difference. I had the team may not have been in the pool with me that day, but they were standing around the edge of the pool, telling myself that I had this, that I could achieve success. And so even when we have successful scenarios, they may not always go the way we want. And resilience becomes equally important in times of success and in failure. So if we're saying that success isn't always pretty and success isn't always perfect, and that failure sometimes looks deceptively good, maybe it's becoming apparent that we can learn something from every one of our successes and failures, and we can always strive to make ourselves better. Um, so success and failure can be two sides of the same coin. And the other part of cultivating resilience is cultivating this never give up attitude, always persevering. And this is something that I learned from my time in martial arts. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. If you still have a pulse, you have the ability to keep going after your goals. So the next lesson I want to talk to you about is goal setting. Because I know so many of you are starting out in your careers, you have goals of things that you want to do, where you want to end up. Maybe some of you want to be astronauts as well. And so my advice to you is, don't try to look at someone else and say, oh my gosh, I'm so behind. Or, don't try to do everything in the same 24 hours, because I'm often asked, like, how are you doing all this? And my answer is relax. There's a season for everything. So it's not like I'm piloting a plane and skydiving out of it, landing in the ocean, scuba diving out, running into the emergency room just in time to deliver a baby, and then going home to practice Russian and martial arts and Spanish. I'm prioritizing. And so that's what I mean when I say there's a season for everything. Just as if you're a star athlete in school, you're still not playing lacrosse and volleyball and hockey and basketball in the same 24 hours. You're prioritizing different things at different parts in your life. And one of the tools that I use to help keep me on track when it comes to my goals is something that I've learned from piloting. And it's what I call maintaining a rate of scan. And so just as when you're driving an automobile, you're doing the same thing. You're looking outside the car to see where you are in relation to where you want to be. You're looking at the rear view mirror to maintain a sense of how what's going on behind you, and what your progress is on your way to get there, as well as looking at the dashboard to get a sense of the health of your instruments. Same thing when I'm piloting. I'm looking outside the world around me to get a sense of what's going on. I'm looking at my instruments to see what the health of my airplane is, as then I'm looking at my map as well. And the idea is, where am I in relation to where I want to be? And what is my progress to get there? And it's the exact same thing with goal setting. Set your goals, set your short-term, immediate-term, intermediate-term, long-term goals, and then constantly check in with each of those so you can get a sense of where it is you are in relation to where you want to be and where you started, and what is your progress on the way to get there. Part of knowing where it is you want to end up, of course, is also knowing yourself inside out. And so I highly encourage you every few years to get a sense of who it is you are versus who you want to be, and knowing your values. Because if you have certain values, taking stock of what is most important to you versus what you're doing in action in everyday life, sometimes there's a discordance between the two, and you're not satisfied because what your values are not what you're practicing in life. So every few years, taking 20 seconds to write down your core values. Mine are exploration, gathering knowledge, freedom, curiosity, and then loyalty, working with really good teams. And so the life I have really reflects those values. And it also helps me determine who is it that I am versus who it is that I want to be? And is there a gap? And if so, how do I close that gap? And then the final thing I want to say about knowing yourself is addressing the imposter syndrome, because we all feel this, myself included. For those of you who don't know, the imposter syndrome is that sense of, I don't belong here. I'm not good enough to be here. Everyone else here knows what they're doing. They have so much more experience. But the secret is, we all feel like that. And if you turn this concept on its head and say, well, what if I think maybe I am early stage and maybe it's too early for me to be here in medical school or in the space industry? But think of it this way. Think of it as an opportunity to grow into who you want to be. because someone somewhere believed that you had the skill set and the attitude and the aptitude to become that person that you're striving to be. So even if you don't feel like you belong where it is that you've ended up, it's an opportunity for you to grow into that position. And the skill sets that are free, that don't take any talent, are discipline, keeping yourself on track, staying organized, and working really, really hard. Those things will help you get to where it is you want to end up in life. The fourth lesson that I want to share is you're not going to get to where you are on your own. So surround yourself by good people. And I have a picture of my mom in this picture because she's absolutely one of those people. She's one of my cheerleaders. So have those people who are going to cheer you on, who are going to walk through walls for you. But the flip side of that is you have to be willing to do the same for them. You can't ask the utmost of your team unless you're willing to be that person for them, that cheerleader, that person who's there for them in tough times. And the last thing I want to say to you is pay it forward. Whether you realize it or not, wherever you are in your career, if you are a student in grade school, if you're an undergraduate student, if you're a professional, someone somewhere looks up to you, whether you realize it or not. If you're in grade 10, maybe there's a grade 9 student who's like, oh my gosh, she's so successful. She's doing all these things. She's has this career path. I want to be like her. You're a role model. And no one gets to where they are without someone having taken the time to invest in them. I certainly wouldn't be where I am if people at the height of their careers hadn't taken the time to invest in myself. So remember that. And when someone asks you for your time or your advice, remember all the people who got you to where you are today. And to just illustrate this point, when I was in my final year of medical school, I was lucky enough to be sponsored by the Canadian Space Agency to go down to NASA's Johnson Space Center to complete a 1-month aerospace medical elective. And on my first day there, I was really frazzled. I lost my passport. As a Canadian, I wasn't allowed onto NASA's JSC base without my passport. So I walked into my off-base office, and the phone rang, and I said, "Oh, you have to hold on for a second. I lost my passport." And then I put the person on hold, and then it clicked as to who it was I had just put on hold, because the person at the other end of the line said, "Hey, this is Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hadfield." And he'd been calling to just spend time and liaise with myself and the other Canadian medical student. And it boggles my mind that this was a person, it's not like he wasn't busy. This was in 2012. He was training to be commander of the International Space Station. But he still took the time to reach out and say hello, take myself and the other medical student for coffee, answer our questions about space, teach us about flying. And so this to me has been a lifelong lesson that someone at the pinnacle of their career who was extraordinarily busy still took the time to pay it forward. And so that's what, no matter who you are, where you are, never be too busy to invest in others, because I for sure myself would not be where I am today without others investing in me. Finally, I just want to say, keep pushing the limits. Why does that matter? Why does it matter to keep pushing the boundaries, pushing yourself harder, faster, further than you've been before? Well, it's kind of like materials stress testing. When we're stress testing, we push materials to their breaking point. We push them to the edge. And the reason that we do that is twofold. It's to know where the boundary is, so maybe we don't approach that in the future. And character is a lot like that. We push our own boundaries, maybe to know that that's where a comfort level is, and we don't go any further in the future. Or it's so that we know where the breaking point is and we can reinforce that material, reinforce our character, and then push ourselves further and faster and higher the next time. And so this all really fell into place for me when I was at the Mars Desert Research Station. We would go on our exploratory excursions. We called them EVAs. And when we would, myself and my EVA extravehicular activity buddy, we would climb the highest mountains, the steepest slopes, the most slippery hills. And the worth of why we put in all that effort became apparent when we got to the top. Because if we didn't push our limits, we wouldn't know all that beauty that lay to be seen and discovered, and the paths that we could go on to next. We push our limits to know what comes next. So all of these skill sets have helped get me to where I am today as an explorer, physician, aquanaut, skydiver, scientist, astronaut candidate, and more. And I have no doubt that in a few years' time, I'll be watching you on the stage, giving a keynote, talking about where you are and how you've gotten to where you want to be. So in closing, take these lessons and apply it to your own lives. Pick something you really love, develop that work ethic, work really, really hard, dare to be curious and explore and wonder, find those opportunities and make your own opportunities, and then push the limits. And when you reach the edge of your limits, push even further. I am so excited to see where you end up. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to connecting with you. My social media information is here. All the best. Enjoy your Stardust Festival. Take care, everyone.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandya, for providing that recording for us and for joining us here for some little question period. We really appreciated it.
My pleasure. Yeah, absolutely.
So we have some questions over here. So the first one was right at the start, you mentioned how one of the research projects you were working on was in Northern Alberta, and that there actually are a lot of opportunities locally, including in northern communities like where we are today in Cochrane. But how do we find these opportunities? It doesn't seem always obvious where to actually get that information.
Yeah, I think this goes back to one of the things I said in my talk is keep an eye out for opportunities, but also don't be afraid to create your own. And so, for example, 2 examples of that is the aerospace medical elective internship at NASA for medical students that I mentioned. So this was something that I was aware of since grade 11, even though I wouldn't be qualified to even apply for it until over a decade later when I was in my final year of medical school. So figuring out what you want to do and making yourself a better candidate. And then the other part of it is making opportunities. So what we do with citizen science and astronautics at the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences is a perfect example of that. We saw opportunities with noctilucent clouds, and we thought, okay, well, there's a lot of good data to be done by folks who are interested in upper mesospheric science, even if they don't have the background, but they have a scientific background of sorts, we'll draw them into this field. And that's how we got to be citizen scientists. And that's how I got to be part of that campaign in Northern Alberta. So, creating your own opportunities and, finding like-minded people. And then finally realizing that this is the best possible time to be alive and interested in space and exploration. There's amazing organizations like SEDS Canada, venues like the Stardust Festival to connect with like-minded people.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah, that's a thread we've been hearing a ton this week, just finding the opportunities or making them if they don't exist yet. Great. So we have another question here. Your story about the parabolas, and I kind of think that can relate to, in a wider way, like you mentioned, you have to consider how our decisions might impact others. You were really upset that you may have impacted other people's data collection. But if we kind of extend that to a much broader way, how can the work we do with space, maybe how do we consider the communities that are where the ground infrastructure is based, how that impacts them?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting spin on a question that normally I'm asked, what has space done for me lately? How do we get benefits from space to Earth? And there's so many examples of it, but this is a really astute and careful question to ask going forward, because environmental impacts, respect for infrastructures that already exist is so critical. We hear about that with, for example, managing space debris all the time. And so realizing that there's so many different forms of knowledge and wisdom out there, realizing that, Western science is one framework through which to learn about, our celestial heritage, but also paying attention to other perspectives, the experience that brings, and finding a way to work together to amplify our knowledge as an entire human race.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's something we've been trying to think about a lot this week at the festival. And lastly, it's not a question, but it's more of a comment, because we had our Launch Canada rocketry teams working hard all week. And I just think they can totally relate with all of the resilience that you were talking about. That's important, because they were super resilient this week getting all of their rockets launched.
I've been following along on Twitter and watching the Launch Canada team. So congratulations to all of everyone who participated. Even just coming together as a team is incredible. So well done.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you again for showing up here again for this Q&A period. We really appreciate it.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. All right, everyone. So that concludes our streams on this particular link. But if you do jump over to our other stream, we do have 2 more speakers joining us in about 25 minutes. Thank you so much. Bye.